Cheers. Thanks very much. I think the live Twitter feed on the side is off, which is kind of cool now. But please harass me on Twitter in public. All good. All right. So I've got about 62 slides, apparently only 20 minutes, so it's like 3 a minute, okay? Sometimes the words and the pictures might not quite sync up. So today I'm going to be talking a bit about something I'm very passionate about, this idea of a mission-driven startup. Which is really talking around how building a culture around a cause enables a kind of product to grow itself and kind of organically reach a market. Sounds pretty neat, huh? First introduction. So I'm Nilan. I'm responsible for product and marketing at TransferWise, and generally I just buy the drinks for everyone to keep them all happy. So a mission-driven startup, what is one? It's an idea and kind of semantic we tried to introduce into the organization and started talking about it probably about a year ago when we really started scaling headcount, and really worried about that time that the organization would lose its way and people would start focusing on things like making money instead of changing the world. And for me, quite succinctly, a mission-driven startup is a catalyst for changing the world. But unlike a charity, it kind of like covers its own costs and scales, and people get paid. It's kind of cool. It's quite a neat thing. But like, every startup, if you think about it, starts to solve a problem, and quite usually the founder's own personal problem. I mean, you think of Uber. Travis tried to get a taxi, couldn't get a taxi, started Uber. And similarly, like any good startup, we have an apocryphal founding story, which is true. And our founders had a problem. That's Christo and Tava. So Christo was working in London and and paying a mortgage actually in Estonia, and sending about £1,000 every month. And each time he did that, the bank took £50. So £50 every time he sent £1,000. And Tava was sending money the other way, about £1,000 as well, and again losing £50. And they met each other at a party, and they were complaining about this, and they struck on this kind of genius idea: why don't I pay your mortgage and you put money in my savings account, and we'll both save 50 quid. So that was like the first version of TransferWise. Like 0 lines of code, 100% customer value, super fast time to market, like amazing. It was so cool, they created the second version of TransferWise, which was a Skype chat. They invited all their friends who are Estonians, sending euros to pounds, and Brits sending pounds to euros, and let them match each other that way. Again, second version of TransferWise, no code, time to market pretty fast, and that went pretty well. So then one day, Christo just built a website one weekend, and all the website was a form asking people who wants to send pounds to euros and euros to pounds. And you fast forward to today, and it's slightly more complex than that, but we're live now in well over 60 countries and over 300 routes, moving close to 1 billion every day. But the point here is, what's different here is a bank could do that tomorrow. In fact, a bank could have done that exactly the way in which we move money at any point in the last 100 years. They just choose not to. So there's a bunch of incumbents who've got a monopolistic position, and they're kind of abusing that to charge rent on consumers. And there's no way that would ever change. I met recently one of the chief executives of the big 4 banks, and I asked them, so why don't you kind of drop prices for your customers? Like, you're charging them 5% for a money transfer, like your bank is the biggest source of customers for us. And he said, why should I? We made about 100 billion in money transfer fees last year. I know exactly how many customers you're taking from me. I try to retarget them via email, and I'm just optimizing my revenue. So I just went back to the team. At first I was kind of depressed because he didn't want to work with us to reduce costs. But then I kind of realized we just need to keep doing what we're doing, and eventually we'll get to the scale where they will have to reduce costs. And that's what I mean by being a startup as a catalyst to change the world. And that mission that underpins the startup, It took us a while to figure this out. We only got to writing this down 3 months ago. So to make money zip around the world at the touch of a button for almost zero cost instantly. But importantly, as I said, it's more important than our own short-term commercial success. And one way of kind of like demonstrating that is I was at Parliament a couple of weeks ago. So we and our customers successfully lobbied the government in the UK when David Cameron was PM to make it illegal for banks to hide fees in the exchange rate. And he made it a manifesto pledge. So 80% of the UK don't know that there's a fee in the exchange rate. So when they do a money transfer, they're just like, oh, that was the exchange rate. No, it's not. The exchange rate was actually 5% less. Okay, and the bank took 5% from you, and it's pretty cool. We got a manifesto pledge, but nothing changed. So we were back in Parliament lobbying the government in order to bring transparency, and that doesn't really help us on a commercial basis, but that will help us achieve the mission. Okay, I'll talk a bit now about progress, our numbers. So the blue line's actually accurate. That's the number of people that have used TransferWise for the first time. And when I joined 3 years ago, it's like all the way over there, we were moving about 500,000 a month, having about 60 people. And these days, we're moving close to 1 billion a month, and we have 600 people. And gone from offices in London, Ukraine, Estonia to London, Ukraine, Estonia, Tokyo, Sydney, Singapore, Tampa, Budapest, yeah. And the cool bit is, in terms of share, we're probably about 8% of the UK now. But most importantly, we're saving around our customers about £1 million a day, which is pretty cool. If you think about like where that money would have gone previously and how it kind of helps the economy right now. So how did that all happen? Well, that's the green line. So last month, 80% of people that used TransferWise for the first time found out about TransferWise from a friend. And 3 years ago, that was only 20% who joined us through word of mouth. So it's a pretty neat trick, like build a product, customers use it, then they tell their friends, and then more people use it. That's pretty cool. And the kind of hypothesis is just purely by using the product, people become evangelical about the product and more importantly about the cause. So I wouldn't say we've figured out like some super clever system on how to do that, but I'll share with you what we've understood so far around building a product organization and marketing organization and teams around trying to build a product that grows itself. So I guess the first question is like, why do people recommend TransferWise? And through talking to lots of customers, we kind of quickly got to the conclusion that people recommend for two broad sets of reasons. Either very rational reasons where they talk about the product, or emotional ones where they talk about what we stand for, our cause, our brand, and our mission. On the product side, they use words like, you've got to use TransferWise because it's really cheap. You've got to use it because it's really fast. You've got to use it, it's really easy to use. So there's price, speed, convenience. We call those our product pillars. And the cool things about those is you can measure them. And when we measure them, we found something quite interesting. That in order to get advocacy, we needed to be an order of magnitude better than the alternative. So if you think about price, banks charge 5%. If we charge 4.8, right, we might get a customer, but you're not going to tell your mum about us. The banks charge 5, we charge 0.5. You're sending £1,000, you save 45 quid. You do that 4 times, you get almost £200. You go on holiday, you tell your friends, I'm going on holiday, not because of TransferWise, but because my bank was stealing from me. It's quite provocative. With regards to speed now, we're now live with instant payments in the UK, where the money turns up in your bank account faster than you get the email saying the money's turned up in your bank account. It's pretty cool, but we don't do these things as like some clever growth hack. There's no one inside TransferWise thinking, I've dropped price by 10%. Did I get more than 20% more customers? It's like, because if you do that, we just instantly become that bank I talked about. We do it because that's the way it should be, because it doesn't cost a huge amount to move money. We do it because the world deserves it. So then let's talk a bit about the brand and our story here, how we kind of learnt how to talk about what we stood for. So I remember our first marketing director, Joe Cross. So I remember for the first year, we didn't grow at all. We had like 100 customers every month. Totally thought we were going to die at any point. And we recognized that given that price was going to go down in this market, we just couldn't keep spending money on marketing. We had to figure a way to get our customers to talk about our product. And I remember Joe telling me, look, Nilan, people don't talk about money transfer in the pub, which is true. It's pretty dull. So we tried to give our customers stories to tell. And at first, that was like angry young startups swearing in ads. People talked about that. Then doing crazy stunts in the street. People talked about that as well. But more recently, probably for the last 18 months, we found people talk about our cause, what we stand for. And we stumbled on that at the point we rebranded to this flag symbol, which was 18 months ago. So at that point, we send this email out to our customer base. So there's no crazy photography, no discount. It's just the kind of manifesto of the world we're trying to create. We acquired more customers through people forwarding that email on than any form of marketing we've previously done. Before this point, we actually thought our customers actually don't give a shit about what we stand for. They just use us for cheap transfers. We actually saw that this stuff actually resonates with them. When we told our customer base we were going to Parliament, it's a completely crazy stat, but 10,000 of them, 10,000, responded to the email and said they'd love to come and help. Again, that's completely insane. And we weren't expecting that level of passion in our customer base behind our cause as well. And it's obviously a massive lever of our growth if we learned how to use it. So I think of us more as a movement and the brand, the way in which we kind of create that. Okay, so given this is a product conference, Matilda's super clear with me that I should leave the fluffy bullshit and talk through some really practical stuff as well around what it's like to work at TransferWise and some of the stuff that works well and some of the stuff that doesn't work so well. So how do we think about our product strategy? How do we think about product? So simplest way is so given that mission I talked about at the beginning, what are the big problems you need to solve to achieve that mission? Okay, well, if you're going to make all that happen, you're probably going to have to make the first big problem is you need to make people aware that they're getting ripped off in the exchange rate. So most people don't know. 80% don't know. So that's a problem. The next is you need to figure out how to get them to trust you and use you. That's a big problem we need to solve. You need to verify they are who they say they are. So when you get into the detail, payment networks, country by country, are effectively owned by proxy by the government rather than by banks. And the government has regulators in place as well who kind of make sure that people are using those networks legally. And there's a bunch of very good and sensible anti-money laundering regulation country by country that kind of make sure that when Nilan uses TransferWise and I type in my name as I'm Nilan, I need to actually make sure I am Nilan. So solving identity globally actually becomes one of the big problems. We probably need to be regulated and available in every single country in the world. That's a big problem. And then this hard one, how do you actually make the money move? For almost nothing. So those are kind of rational problems. On the journey, we found a couple of more softer ones. How do we kind of help our customers not worry? That's actually quite a big problem about where their money is. And how do we make them feel proud of being part of TransferWise and feel like they're actually changing the world? We call that evangelism. So there's this thing in computer science called Conway's law. And it kind of states that an organization will tend to computer system will tend to reflect the organization structure over time. So if you have a sales team, you'll have a sales system, a supply chain team, a supply chain system, etc. And 3 years ago when I joined, we had two teams. One team was called Grow Quickly. The other team was called Don't Fuck Up. And we had, on the code base side, a monolith. All right. So how do we move forward from there? So we decided to hack Conway's Law. And we decided to put teams around solving each of these problems. And over time, they'd modularize and abstract the code away to enable us to move faster and faster in solving those problems. So the easy bit is kind of figuring out some of the stuff I've talked about. The hard bit is figuring out how you get 600 people to move in the same direction, doing that, caring about customers and not kind of missing a beat. And that's where culture comes in. And I describe the objective of our culture to enable us to move as quickly as possible. So where we've got to on that so far is probably best summarized by this crazy sentence. So we run in autonomous, independent teams, each focused on KPIs that measures a team's impact on our customers by solving those problems, and hence drives our growth. So let's just take an example. So the team that makes sure that we're available and live in every country is called the Currencies team. It's like a launch team. Goes around the world launching us in markets. Last major one was probably to Vietnam. So the Currencies team is autonomous. So what does that mean? It means that the team as a whole decides what currencies to launch every quarter. There isn't like a VP strategy who says, you know what, you're going to launch Indian rupee next quarter. So the currencies team says, like, next quarter we're going to launch these 16 currencies. So the assumption is that the team is intelligent. It's a bit of an assumption. Kind of looks at data, talks to customers, figures out what's the right things that they should be launching. But because they're closest to customers and closest to the problem, they're actually better positioned than anyone else to be able to figure out what we should launch next and why. Second word I used was they're independent. So for this model to work well, the currencies team needs to have everything within it you need to launch a currency. Product managers, engineers, designers, ex-bankers, everything you'd need in order to be regulated in the country, build a bit of plumbing, integrate with a banking partner, and go live. The team needs a way of measuring its impact. So we have KPIs, so they have to figure out some number that measures, are we making progress towards achieving that mission? And the currencies team likes to look at how many new customers came in from the routes that we launched in the last quarter. And the teams need to be accountable. So in the old days, it was definitely probably me and Christo and Tavet that the teams felt accountable to. But these days, when you've got 600 people, they feel accountable to each other. And their peers hold them to account, and their peers support them in challenging them on why you're spending your time on this when this seems to be a bigger problem that we have a larger purchase on, that we can have a bigger impact on. And our resource and teams and engineers and product managers and designers flow to where they believe they can have an impact. So this is best summarized, so people often ask me actually, how did we end up here? So like, how did you end up with that culture? And there's two reasons. It's obviously a lot to do with our founders. So Tavet, on one side, he's happy saying this, he's fundamentally lazy, right? So he believes in hiring super smart people and getting out of the way and letting them get on with it. And Christo kind of lives and breathes this stuff. He's like, the product we build is an outcome of the people we hire and the decisions they choose to take. The most I can do is try to influence the culture, their basis for decision making. So, typically in startups, you have these founders who have a vision from God, and God tells them, you will build a money transfer startup, and gives them like detailed wireframes in their head, and they kind of micromanage it out, and it's like watching an elephant, a mouse give birth to an elephant, and it's horrible. But Christo quite quickly realized he couldn't do this, right? He certainly didn't have the answer of what to do in Brazil, or what to do in Indonesia, or what to do in India. And as did Tavet. And so they tried to build teams and inspire them to figure out, to want to solve that problem. And that's a much more difficult path, but it's kind of how you build a long-term business. So just very practically, in the last few minutes, I'll just talk you through how this works in practice. Try and give you some real-life examples of it. Values I won't talk about too much. You can kind of read them. They kind of help. The most important one that I think is the kind of North Star one is customers are more important than what your team believes is important, are more important than what you believe is important. It's pretty important. Product. So we have a cadence of quarters. So every quarter, our teams get together. Each team stands up has literally 5 minutes to talk through their plan for the next quarter and talk through the updates to their 12 to 24 month roadmap. And they kind of get feedback and challenged and supported by the teams, and our roadmap forms kind of organically through that process. So team maturity. So all our teams aren't working great, right? So when we started like this, TransferWise was definitely no different to any other business I'd ever worked at, which is 10% of the teams had an impact, the rest of them were just along for the ride. Does that make sense? And so I kind of learned a lot around how teams form and how they get really good at having an impact. So at the beginning, all the way on this side, they can't articulate what is the problem that they're solving. So they can't say, this is the problem we're solving for our customers. They really struggle with that. Then after time, they kind of get clear. So for example, our experience team, it looks after the product from the point at which you send the money. It's a huge area of the product. They couldn't figure out what are we optimizing that for? Then over time, they said, we're optimizing that for people not to worry after they send the money. Then it took them a long while to figure out, how do we measure progress? And they figured out, we're going to measure progress by whether they call us or not, contact rate. Then it takes an even longer time to actually move contact rates, because to move contact rate, you need to figure out some deep understanding of the human psyche on why people are calling you, some change you're going to make in the product that's going to impact that, and then you launch it, and wow, it actually worked. But if we keep doing that week after week, month after month, you have to get to a super deep understanding. So to get really to a roadmap or to a vision. So very few teams are all the way at the Darth Vader stage. And most of us are very much work in progress. Briefly, weak product ownership. So every part of our product is owned. But any team can change any part of the product. And this was inspired by what I call the great Mexican standoff of product management between product and marketing, where the marketing team say, you know what, we're not growing because the product's fucked. And the product team say, it's not happening because the marketing team keeps sending us poor quality users. So I kind of got tired of hearing that in every single business I've worked. So we put a product team into marketing, and we said, you can change anything you want in the product. It was amazing. They didn't know nothing happened because they didn't know what to do. But over time, that idea of a team figuring out we can change anything, we just need to be able to explain to the other team that owns that area why we're doing it, has helped us move forward incredibly fast and get leverage on parts of the product we wouldn't normally have. Engineering culture, so this is a very strong, hard rule we have. Product managers cannot tell engineers what to do. I think this is one of our big fail-safes that prevents crazy shit from getting built. Because if you cannot inspire an engineer, you will completely fail to inspire a customer. This is pretty helpful, and I think that's part of the reason why we've managed to be as successful as we are. And yeah, we try to take that further to engineers talking to customers directly, because then, there's no faster feedback loop than that. Finally, I finish up with targets. So obviously in our board meeting, you can constantly imagine, so how fast are you growing? Are you growing fast enough? You guys can grow faster. And one of the questions that comes up a lot is what constrains our growth rate? And how big can we be? And ultimately, that's a good example. So Brazil went out of nowhere to be, let's just say, one of our biggest markets in 6 months. And it went out of nowhere to be one of our biggest markets in 6 months because we figured a way of moving money out of Brazil faster and cheaper than anyone else on the planet had ever done before. It was way more than 10x better. And it just grew like wildfire. And that happens because we incentivize our teams to understand what matters to customers and go through walls to make that happen. And you can't tell the board, you know what, Brazil's going to be huge in 2 weeks because you don't know when that's going to happen. And you need to have the discipline to be able to manage your stakeholders in order to do that. So what are the constraints on growth? Well, it's the rate at which you hire people then. The rate at which you inspire them to figure out how to have an impact. And that's where we spend our time, because that's the ultimate growth lever for us. So in operating this way, we've kind of given up a bit of level of consistency, a level of efficiency, kind of like no one knows everything that's going on at any point in time. What we kind of gain is ownership, speed, agility, kind of shared ownership. And that's a very deliberate trade-off that we made. Cool, so that's me. I think I'll be up for Q&A in about after the next speaker.